It is June 24th, 2022. Question: is the right to abortion an inalienable right of every American? Is it a right that is shared by all Americans? Is this right rooted in tradition, history, and culture? The answer is what helped to shape today's decision of the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade. We all have a right to life, and we must also protect the right to life, not just for self, but the right of others to live. But when that right to life clashes with the right to choose, then we must ask, what is the highest ethic? Is it not the right to life? But is abortion of a fetus tantamount to killing a person? Well, it all depends on your value as a conservative or a liberal, and this is the sticking point. But if truth be told, the fetus is part of the continuation of life itself. So then one may argue that the fetus's life must be protected, as in doing so, one is protecting life itself and its continued existence. We will continue with that discussion. But there is also this. The Senate passed a bipartisan Safer Communities Act to begin tackling gun violence, which expands background checks and close gun loopholes. But will this actually curb the gun violence plaguing communities like Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, Uvalde, Texas, Buffalo, New York, etc.? We are yet to find out. But what we know is that guns don't kill people, people kill people. And with the rise of extremism, poverty, declining median incomes, and the challenge of parenting and socialization, where the young are being primarily socialized by media that devalues the individual. So then, the solution must be multifaceted. And does this bill provide a multifaceted and comprehensive approach to curbing gun violence? We will share these comments and this news with you right here on the Neoliberal Round podcast when we come back. We have some breaking news that's coming in. The Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, undoing the constitutional right to abortion. And this is in a sweeping decision. According to the Times, an article written by Abigail Abrams and Madeline Carlisle on June 24th, published on June 24th, 2022 in the Times. They write that the U.S. Supreme Court has overturned Roe versus Wade, striking down the constitutional right to abortion established in the landmark ruling nearly 50 years ago. According to the article, on June 24th, the High Court ruled that pre-viability bans on elective abortions are constitutional, with Justice Samuel Alito writing the majority opinion joined by Justices Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Chief Justice John Roberts filed his own opinion, concurring in the judgment. The court's three liberal justices, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan, dissented. After nearly half a century of constitutional protections for abortion, the ruling fundamentally reshapes access to reproductive health care across the United States. According to the article, 13 states have already enacted trigger laws that are designed to ban all or nearly all abortions once Roe is overturned, and those will now go into effect, some immediately and others in the coming hours and days. Now, this is significant. This is very significant. And I say to you, when you look at the justification for their decision, for the justice's decision, you may have to concur. You may have to concur with them, because I believe it's a forceful decision. According to the justices, a right to abortion is not deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions, and that is true. That is true. Judge Alito continues saying that, on the contrary, an unbroken tradition of prohibiting abortion on pain of criminal punishment persisted from the earliest days of the common law until 1973. And that is true. And when we look at, of course, the role of the court, and by the way, this is definitely going to create some kind of backlash. And I would love to see what's going to happen, because when we have heard of some threats that the Joe Biden administration or some persons were pressuring or lobbying Joe Biden's administration, or probably were hoping that part of the plan was to restructure so as to add more persons to the Supreme Court. But we have heard of that, but we haven't seen any indication of that. But I don't know, will that conversation, will that particular discussion be rekindled? Will they start having that discussion again? That's one thing. But and of course it will have rippling effects, because we're going to think about funding. What about funding the programs? Because this is going to affect federal funding of abortion, Planned Parenthood, women's reproductive health systems, and that depend heavily on federal programs. That is going to be affected. Where will they get the funding from? Will they now have to turn to private individuals to access funding in order to continue their programs? And it's also going to affect staffing and so on and so forth. But this is very significant. But when you look at the purpose of the Supreme Court, the purpose of the Supreme Court is to review laws. And it is also to ensure that laws are not impinging or infringing on Americans' constitutional right. And here they are saying that the right to abortion is not a right that is deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions, and therefore it is not something that we should consider as a right. It is not a right. So that is significant, but also I would like to extend the argument, saying it is not also a broadly accepted right. It is not something. Say, for example, we all agree that every American and every individual have that unalienable right, freedom of speech, and for those who can speak or express them, freedom of expression, so or the right to life. So we have certain freedoms, which we have right to freedoms, and we have certain rights. The right to life is a right that is accorded to everyone. But do we all agree that we all have the right to abortion? Now that is the question, and if I ask you that, not all Americans agree or accept that abortion is a right that should be accorded. In fact, there are those who are conservatives who believe that that abortion affects the right to life. And of course, there is so that's a major. And there are those who believe that if we take away this right, we're taking away woman's right. That is the argument. But that probably one could argue that is an argument from convenience. That is an argument from the convenience, because the right to life is not a right that is based on the whims and fancy of a particular individual, be it man or woman. The right to life is accorded to everyone, and also every individual have a right to protect that life, not just your life, but the life of another human being where that life is threatened. So there are those who make that argument to say that it is their right to protect the fetus. But of course there are those who argue, well, the fetus is not a life. So therefore the woman has that right to determine whether or not to have the fetus, or to have, until there is an issue of when does life begin. So comes the conundrum. When does life begin? And there are those who, based on the decision that they have taken, would argue that life begins after the fetus is born. And there are those, based on the decisions that they have, determinations and the political or economic or the particular value that they have, will say that, well, so you see, the outcome has already influenced the logic, people's logic of the conversation, so to speak. But of course, as it relates to the issue, so if you look at, so we want to do a poll. So there are those, and people have done studies upon studies to find out about people's opinion on abortion. And of course, if you are a conservative, or you appeal to certain religious values, it is always that you do not support it. And there are those liberal Christians or liberals who would say, well, only if it threatens the life of the mother. There are those who would argue, say, well, that is for them, that is the takeaway, that is the compromise. If the fetus affects the life of the mother, then whose life is more important here, the mother or the fetus? But studies show, and the data shows, that majority of the abortions that are being done are not being done to preserve or to protect the life of the mother. But a lot of the abortions are being done based on political or ideological or religious reasons, or to save face, or economic reasons. So there are issues of economics that is important. And there are many other reasons, but this is quite a very significant, the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Quite powerful. Actually, this was not the discussion for today, because there are several other things that's happening in the news. There are several other things that's happening in the news that we have to get to, that we must talk about. Several things that's happening in the news that we definitely must get to and we must talk about. And of course, one of which is this new law that is supposed to be going back to the House regarding some new restrictions on gun. While, just so you know, New York just recently passed a law. New York just recently had its gun law. Its gun laws to loosen, to strengthen to strengthen restrictions as it relates to the access of guns. That was struck down by the Supreme Court, which of course will have a rippling effects. It will, of course. So there's several things that's happening. With the Supreme Court has become very vigilant lately, and we talk about a liberal court, a conservative court. But of course, we know there are 6 justices, the conservative, and there are 3 liberals. But we find that it's gonna and the next thing I want to see what's gonna happen next, the issue of affirmative action, because I know that was on the books at once, but I believe that that I think they had already tried to overturn that, but the justices had left that. So, but this is quite an interesting moment in America's history. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to the episode. So just now I was actually doing some research, just learning about the representatives in Pennsylvania, and while learning about our representatives in Pennsylvania, of course, we have a Republican senator who is Mr. Pat Toomey is the Republican senator, and also we have Bob Casey, and Bob Casey is the other senator, and of course Tom Wolf is the governor. But while looking at Bob Casey, he was talking about this new initiative that he was part of, this new bill, and if I'm going to bring up the bill for you. If we could find it real quickly here, there's a new bill on gun crime, as a country and as a people, as we seek to fight gun violence in this country, which is a serious issue. It's a crippling issue. It's as if America is under siege, and we are not under siege, as I said, from the gun. We are under siege from our own citizens, from our own neighbors, from our own people. Okay, we say that people kill people. Guns don't kill people. Guns are tools that are used by human beings to exact some kind of end that they want to achieve. And of course, there's the issue as less people will be affected with a lesser weapon or less restrictions. With more restrictions, then they'll have less access. And less access means because, say for example, that 18-year-old who massacred 19 kids in Uvalde school in Texas, and 2 teachers were also murdered by this young man before he was killed by the authorities. Had an AR, an automatic rifle, and I believe that the semi-automatic rifle, and you can read the story in the Associated Press or the New York Times as well. But that's quite revealing. But the Senate on Thursday night passed a bipartisan bill to address gun violence that amounts to the first major federal gun safety legislation in decades. The final vote was 65-33. With 15 Republicans joining Democrats in support of the measure, marking a significant bipartisan breakthrough on one of the most contentious policy issues in the country. According to CNN, the bill next will go to the House for a vote before it can be sent to President Joe Biden to be signed into law. The bipartisan gun deal includes millions of dollars for mental health, school safety, crisis intervention programs, and incentives for states to include juvenile records in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. It also makes significant changes to the process when someone ages 18 to 21 goes to buy a firearm, and closes the so-called boyfriend loophole, a victory for Democrats who have long fought that. Now, I have said the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is the most significant legislation to begin to tackle gun violence in nearly 3 decades. This is according to Senator Bob Casey. Senator Bob Casey, on his Instagram page, Senator Bob Casey says the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act is the most significant legislation to begin to tackle gun violence in nearly 3 decades. The bill will expand background checks, close loopholes that put guns in the hands of those who shouldn't have them, crack down on gun traffickers, as well as invest in community violence programs to address the gun violence plaguing cities like Philadelphia. It also makes significant investment in mental health programs, particularly for children, to ensure people get the support they need. Americans deserve to feel safe in their schools, grocery stores, synagogues, churches, and communities. Getting this bill to the president's desk and signed into law will save lives. So this is a significant bill because, again, the bill will expand background checks and it will close loopholes that put guns in the hands of those who shouldn't have them. Now, this is important because sometime it was just recently that the Supreme Court struck down a New York gun restriction, a New York gun law that limits access or requires greater checks and greater restrictions on guns. But here we have it that this particular so the question is, what is it that how is this bill going to achieve what they hope to achieve when you have the Supreme Court that is striking down gun states and states laws, gun laws, which makes it more difficult for people to have access to guns? What will they come up with? What will be the response to this? Because there's no telling that people are going to challenge this bill. And I say to you, we continue to begin from the perspective, from a wrong premise, starting from the issue of the guns. And I don't believe that requiring greater requiring greater restrictions and will do anything to curb gun violence in this country if we do not have as well other programs that deal with extremism, programs that deal with the kind of socialization or mental health of our kids. Of course, they talk about mental health or something, so it speaks to that one issue. But in a sense, what's happening with families and parenting and social media and the video games that people are playing and how these kids are acting out these games. We talk about some of the socialization in society. Look at what's going on in our music and so on, and the kids are listening to these things that devalue people, that disrespect the other. Rising extremism. We talk about the 18-year-old that killed 10 black people because he was entranced by the white extremism or white supremacy. He was exacting this replacement ideology theory. So we have to deal with the issue of extremism and of course poverty. Many of these if you look at poverty and income figures, incomes are declining, median incomes, while poverty is rising. While at the same time, what is the correlation in effect here? Rising crime and violence in many of these poor communities. So we have to also look at the issue of poverty. Look at the educational outcomes, of course. But so we have to have a comprehensive approach, a quick bill that will seem to clash with the Supreme Court's ruling, and because I would like to see what will they come up with. This bill, what actions will they take that will not clash with the ruling, some of the recent rulings by the Supreme Court. We'll be right back after these messages. Further, as it relates to the recent ruling of the Supreme Court that strikes down New York gun law, there is now the question of what can this act do to come up with any gun policy that does not violate or is interpreted to violate a person's right to carry a firearm. Just so you know, regarding the recent ruling, the ruling was 6-3 ruling, with the conservative justices in the majority and liberal justices in dissent, struck down New York State's limits on carrying concealed handguns outside the home. The court found that the law enacted in 1913 violated a person's right to keep and bear arms under the U.S. Constitution's Second Amendment. The U.S. Constitution's Second Amendment. And for those of us who don't know, the Supreme Court on Thursday declared for the first time that the U.S. Constitution protects an individual's right to carry a handgun in public for self-defense, handing a landmark victory to gun rights advocates in a nation that is deeply divided over how to address firearms violence. And of course, this was a ruling that was authored by Justice Clarence Thomas, which Reuters is saying could undermine similar restrictions in other states and imperil other types of state and local firearms restrictions nationwide. So this particular bill, this Safer Communities Act, which comes right after this ruling, must be scrutinized in terms of what effective action can be taken from this, what policy and what actions can be taken from any policy that speaks to gun reform that will not prevent a challenge or a response from the Supreme Court that determines that action unconstitutional. This is quite an interesting time. As you know, one of the things with somebody, when I interviewed John Castro some time ago, the US 2024 presidential candidate, and he said, when you have the power, you must use it. And he said that Donald Trump had the power and he used it in a way and was able to get a lot of things done. And although he served in one term, the fact that he was able to seat so many judges on the bench, the Supreme Bench, which further tilt the pendulum to the conservatives, which means then that, and now we're seeing an upending of a lot of liberal policies, which is, I'm telling you, it is quite interesting. And then what's going to happen next? A new president takes over, and the justices are then replaced, and then it now goes back to tilting another way or the other, and then all this is reversed. It is quite schizophrenic. It is quite interesting, because when you look at the Westminster system of government and how things are done, and then you have another system of government, a Republican system of government, federal republic system of government, like what we have here. It's quite interesting. It is quite interesting how decisions are made in a democracy, and as it relates to how things are done in another kind of country, and what that means for the country and their identity or decision making and advances and progress and so on and so forth. But I guess it all works it all works towards this balance that the founding fathers were were hoping for, I guess. But there is much to say on this. We will have Nakia Outland on the show. Nakia Outland is an activist. She has done a lot of work. She's an academic and a specialist, social worker case. She's done a lot of work with women's reproductive health and so on and so forth, right here in Pennsylvania. right here in Philadelphia. And we will have her on our show. She is a mom. She's a social worker. She's a sexual educator. She's a sex therapist, an adjunct professor, consultant, and the founder of her organization, of a very important organization. And so we will have her on the show. And we will still have Dr. Andre Isaacs. Dr. Andre Isaacs is a chemist and also a professor at the Holy Cross University in Massachusetts. And we are also going to be having several other very important individuals to distill and to talk with us about some of what's happening in our society. Thank you for listening to the Neoliberal Round podcast. And tomorrow's episode is is part 4 of the series that we are carrying, looking at Caribbean, Pan-African, diasporan perspectives towards developing a Caribbean perspective, where I'm sharing with you a lecture that I had with some students at the Jamaica Theological Seminary, a class that I taught some time ago. It's quite revealing, quite interesting. But share this show with your friend. Send us a feedback so that we can continue to develop ways that we can uniquely make this show interesting. And let me know if you like the introduction where we had that music at the beginning of the show. Let me know if you like that. And if you haven't gotten a copy of your book, of my book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, I ask you to get the book. It's available. And it is heavily discounted, so I invite you to get the book, or reach out to me if you can get access to it on Amazon, or you can go to Ingram Spark. You can go to Barnes & Noble. It's available in all platforms: audio, ebook, hardcover, and paperback. And of course, visit us online at theneoliberal.com or ronaldocmckenzie.com. The Neoliberal Round is brought to you by the Neoliberal Corporation, serving the world today to solve tomorrow's challenges. And of course, this is a podcast from Anchor.fm by Spotify. What good?